Hello, welcome to Christ Culture and Coffee. I'm Robbie Lasher. I'm here with my co-host Tyler Hurley.
Yes, and we're super excited to start a new series with you guys on nihilism.
Yeah, I kind of, to be honest, right up front, it was on the Christ Culture and Coffee Insiders Facebook group a few weeks ago, and I really wanted to do a New Testament reliability series.
The truth comes out.
The truth, yeah. And so I put in there, hey, Insiders, we want your opinion. Do you want a New Testament reliability series, and seriously, on the spot, I was like, what's something no one's going to pick? Nihilism. And I put it in there. And then I was completely wrong, and everybody wants nihilism.
That's how it is.
Pretty much. There were a few people who said, can't you do both? And we probably will get to biblical reliability. But for today, we're starting our nihilism series. So here we go. And I thought it would be great to bring in my good friend, Shawn White. Shawn is just an awesome guy, a brilliant apologist. He graduated from the Master's in Christian Apologetics from Biola University, like myself. He's also currently getting his PhD in Philosophy of Humanities at Faulkner University, and he is a wealth of information on nihilism. So, Shawn, thanks so much for being on the show today, man. We're glad that you're here.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Shawn, as you know, because you've been on our show before, and you and me have hung out a ton, and we've done road trips together, and you know I am pretty addicted to coffee. Actually,
this is true.
You know what, Shawn? I've come to the conclusion I think that coffee is addicted to me.
That's a good perspective.
Yeah, it's just everywhere I go, it follows, and I can't get away from it. But anyway, now, you on the other hand, not addicted to coffee.
This is true. I'm anti-coffee. Not anti-coffee.
Anti?
That's too strong.
Oh, okay.
No. Not anti-coffee. But yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm not a coffee drinker.
You are not a partaker in the greatest beverage of all time.
Well, I don't know. I mean, hot chocolate is at the top of my list. So
Hot chocolate is pretty good, man.
it's a cousin, right?
It is a cousin. Yeah, it's related. So what is something that you do enjoy about coffee? Because obviously not the drink itself, but what's something you do enjoy?
So my wife likes coffee, and she's got a bunch of different kinds here at the house, and
Okay.
I always enjoy the smell of it.
Amen.
I always think it smells great, but man, I can't get past the taste.
Yeah,
So.
that's okay. Hey, that's all right, man. The smell is great, by the way. I love it. I like when I hang out in the coffee shop and then I go home and my clothes smell like coffee.
Yeah.
It's pretty enjoyable.
I actually can't relate. I have no sense of smell, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No, I'm
So
learning
I
new
can't-
things all the time.
I can't smell coffee, actually.
So it's just a taste for you.
Yeah.
Interesting. You learn something new every day.
There you go.
Yeah. All right, well, let's get into it. Shawn, Mr. Expert on nihilism, on nothingism, basically, right? We thought it'd be good to have you on and just give a brief intro to what nihilism is, where it came from, kind of what the tenets of the worldview are,
Yes.
so that we can wrap our mind around it as we move into how do we talk to people that believe this? How do we use apologetics to help them see the truth of reality in Scripture and especially in the resurrection? But so what is an introduction to nihilism?
Okay, well, that's a great question. I think an introduction to nihilism is just the idea, and typically when you use the term nihilism, what most people think of is that it stands for, that nothingness, that everything has no purpose, no value, no right and wrong, that there just isn't any meaning or significance to life or the world, right? And I think that's typically what most people think of, and that would be something that's actually called existential nihilism, right?
Okay.
That life doesn't have any meaning. But there's all sorts of different varieties or shades of nihilism that kind of fall under that big umbrella.
Okay.
And I don't know if you want me to go into some of the history of it.
Yeah, just kind of where did it come from? How did it develop? That would be great.
Yeah, so the term was actually coined by a German philosopher by the name of Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi. Late 1700s, early 1800s. It showed up in some of his writings. He was dialoguing back and forth in some letters with Mendelssohn, and he was critiquing Spinoza's views.
Okay.
And in talking about Spinoza, he coins the term nihilism, that Spinoza's views lead to this idea of nothingness. And so he's really the first philosopher to actually use the term. The first philosopher to actually really kind of focus on it in a way would be the German philosopher Max Stirner, and he lived in the mid 1800s. He picked up on this in his work, and it was written in German but translated in English. It's called The Ego and Its Own, and he put forth this idea of what's called egoism, that the self is autonomous, that we should not be under any kind of authority, whether that is government authority or whether it's religious authority, or we shouldn't even be beholden to other people or our own desires.
Wow.
So it's a really kind of crazy view, right?
Yeah.
That you have to temper your own desires so that you're not a slave to your own appetites, right? So we kind of would see that, as a virtue, right? That you want to temper your desires and your appetites.
Yeah, kind of like self-control. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, but he takes it to this extreme, right? So he would think that like a guy who is, if there was a man who was really greedy and also really selfish and narcissistic, he would see that guy as someone who is not an egoist, even though we may think of him as an egoist, right? That person, because he said he is enslaved to his desire for money. Okay. Right. And so he would kind of say that's bad. But anyway, so he kind of popularized it at a philosophical level in the mid 1800s for a little while, and then it kind of died out, and then Nietzsche picks it up in the late 1800s. Right. But what's interesting is that his view, this Max Stirner's view, had more of a political slant to it, because it was, let's get out from underneath the authority of the government and from any type of legal obligations and police and stuff like that, right? Okay. And so this really kind of took off in Russia. And there was a book written, and we're probably not going to be able to see the cover of this, but that's okay. There was a book that was written and published in 1862 by a Russian author by the name of Ivan Turgenev. Okay. And the name of the book is Fathers and Sons. And the main protagonist in the story, his name is Bazarov, and he is a nihilist. And so this really came into popular culture with the publication of this book. Okay,
that's what brought it down from the philosophical level to normal people understanding it. Okay.
Yeah, and it hit really hard on this political authoritative type of, we need to get out from underneath all authority, right, and be single individuals, and then this eventually spun off into other things. There was a nihilist movement within the Russian government in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It kind of took on the form of anarchy after a while, right? Yeah. You would have dynamiting bombings and terrorism, and it became associated with that kind of group, and that's really kind of where it got it started. But then there's kind of like the idea of moral nihilism, right, which we kind of think of more as relativism. Yeah. Right. So there is no real good moral right and wrong. There is no standard. Mm-hmm. It's just right and wrong, and we kind of make up our own good and what we think is good. Mm-hmm. That it's in our own eyes. That's kind of a moral type of nihilism. There's there's an epistemological nihilism, right? Epistemology, all that means is our theory of knowledge. How do we know things? Mm-hmm. Epistemological nihilism falls under what we would kind of consider today postmodernism. Okay. So epistemological nihilism is just the idea that there really is no source or foundation for knowledge or truth. It's just this kind of free floating whatever.
Okay.
And
And the question you always want to ask is, how do you know that?
Yeah, right.
right.
Like,
Yeah. Because it's just a lack of any type of foundation or authority or source for any of that.
yeah. For morals, for epistemology, for purpose, right? That's kind of there is
Oh,
no
yeah.
authority for anything in nihilism, right?
Right, except for the self, right? The whole idea is to be autonomous,
Okay.
right? To break away from any type of obligation to
Okay.
anyone else or anything else.
That idea
right?
sounds pretty similar to like Buddhist teachings in my
Yes.
idea. Yeah, I would say so. Just in the removing of the self, that's pretty similar in my opinion. At least it sounds in that way. Would that be correct?
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
and if you think about it, right, this kind
Sure.
of Eastern idea of oneness, right, is that Buddhist idea.
Yeah.
But think about what Spinoza was talking about in his philosophy and theology. I mean, that's kind of the direction it was going,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
That he was spouting, and this is why Jacobi kind of calls him out on it in his papers, in his dialogue with Mendelssohn, and he comes up with this term nihilism, right? Because he says Spinoza is going to this direction of nothing,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
It's espousing nothingness, right? And really, in Buddhist thought, I mean, what is nirvana?
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nirvana
It's nothing.
is nothing, right? That's what it means.
Yeah.
It's the self. You're losing your own identity into the one, right? There is no individuals.
Yeah, and that even gets into that idea where that guy said, our desires, we have to learn to control our desires.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Yeah.
Because in Buddhism, one of the things they need to do is desire not to desire,
Right.
which I don't know how you do.
Yeah. That's kind of where my thought process was leading as you were explaining that. It sounds very similar.
Well, Shawn,
Yeah.
why don't they have any grounding for epistemology or morality or purpose? What is the assumed view of the world to say there's really not anything grounding stuff?
Sure.
Well, that's a good question. I think some of it probably comes just from this whole idea of wanting to break free of everything and being completely autonomous from everything else. I mean, I want to be my own authority in all areas, right?
Okay.
I want to be my own authority on what I know. I want to be on my own authority on what I can and cannot do, and nobody can tell me otherwise. But it ends up being a very bleak existence, right? And I'm writing on some of this. I'm going to be writing on some of this on actually in my dissertation. And one of my professors, when we talk about this, I had a little joke of a post on my Facebook, this week on it that nihilism is kind of this child of atheism and why am I forgetting it now?
And materialism, is that what you said?
Yeah, materialism.
Right.
Yeah, materialism. Right. It's this. If atheism and materialism had a baby, they name it nihilism, right? Because that's what it is. Because atheism is this idea of not really skepticism of God exists, but a certainty that God does not exist, right? It's this statement, and materialism is very much the same. Materialism isn't a skepticism of whether the immaterial world or there's an immaterial reality, but it's a statement that all that exists is the material world. Well, when you cut God out of the picture and when you cut any immaterial aspect of reality out of the picture, all you're left is with what?
Yeah.
Just a physical, some type of physical deterministic type of world.
Yeah, well, and how do they deal with because this is the thing that's so almost silly to me is they want to be autonomous, right? It's just me. I'm my own person. But everything is so contingent on the previous causes of my existence. right? So am I ever really autonomous? Because I couldn't be where I'm at unless there were people who taught me language, unless my mom and dad got together, unless it's all like how I am connected to other people. I'm not just my own thing.
Yeah.
I'm contingent on a lot of other prior causes. So I don't know
Yeah.
how they get around that.
Yeah, Stirner has this analogy in his book that he works through where he talks about there's these three different stages that you go through. And he uses this analogy to talk about the history of humanity.
Okay.
But the first stage is the idea that, when you're a child, you're dependent upon your mother. And you're relying upon her for your needs and for living. And then at a certain age, you get to the point to where you're not dependent upon her anymore. And that's the whole reason, right? That you're supposed to break away and that you're supposed to be autonomous from her.
Yeah.
Right.
And he says, and so he's kind of taking a negative view of humanity, though. He says, humanity was like this in the pre-Christian age. And then we got to a Christian age where we kind of broke away from that old view. And now we're beyond that. Now we're beyond the Christian age where we don't even need that. We don't need that type of authority. We can make our own choices. And so he kind of uses this analogy for how he wants to describe how he thinks this kind of plays out.
Okay, so is he saying that nullifies the need for a mother? He's not saying that.
No, I don't know. I mean, he's so difficult to understand.
Sure.
I can get the broad contours of some of what he's saying, but man, some of the stuff is like super.
Yeah. No.
and it doesn't always come across as being consistent.
Yes.
Right.
Sure.
And I think that's the problem is you lack consistency in some of this thinking because, like you were saying, how do you actually escape this chain of causation if things are really determined, right? I mean,
if everything's determined, how can I become autonomous? Because even my desire to be autonomous, even my belief in nihilism is all caused by other things that have happened in the past.
Yeah.
If it's a deterministic worldview, right? If everything is determined and I really don't have a choice in the matter, then you can't think you've ever had an original thought, you've ever had an original action, and yet they write as if, no, these are original thoughts, and I want to encourage people to move into this type of a view.
But then that was determined that they would have written that and then came up with that idea. It's
Right.
like
So it's an inconsistent worldview.
Right, it is, and on these views, especially materialism. I mean, how do you explain things like free will? How do you explain things like a soul or any of that kind of stuff, right? But free will is a big issue, right? Because where does the autonomous self even come from?
What is autonomy?
Yeah, that's right.
On a nihilistic view, if we're just a biological machine,
Right.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, and aside from the inconsistencies and the contradictions that they live out, the depressing aspect of this, if you really believed this was real, it is bleak, like you said. It is completely bleak. Can you speak to why this would just kind of devastate who you are as a human being and what we were made to do with the purpose God's given us?
Yeah. This whole idea of just total idea. I mean, well, let's think about what we're going through right now, right? With the current world situation, with this whole sheltering in place, right? What is cutting oneself off from everyone else doing to them?
It's not good.
Right?
Yeah,
it's not good. It's not good. It's mentally, it's bad, right? The people are getting depressed.
Yeah.
You don't have any type of social contact, not in a real meaningful way where you're actually around people and engaging with people. There's just this hopelessness and this despair that sits in, and if you look at the existentialists from the 1900s, you had Camus and Sartre and those kind of guys writing. if life is just what the nihilist says it is, which is meaningless and purposeless, and there is no significance, then what's the point of me doing anything? If it has no lasting impact on anything, and not just lasting impact past my time here, right? If there's nothing before I came, and then there's nothing after after I've gone, and all that there is this time that I'm alive now, then what's the point of that?
Yeah.
Why am I even here? What am I doing? Why is me getting up every day to go to work not pointless? And why should I continue to do it?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, and to be honest, why try to become autonomous?
Yeah.
Like who cares?
Right.
Like if we're just going into an oblivion of nothing, and the universe is going to experience heat death, and there is no supernatural, and there is no life beyond, and if it really is all nothing, it's just going to nothing, and yet the nihilist tries to act like, well, but we could do this purposeful thing with it. No, you can't. Like in the grand scheme of things, you can't.
Yeah, it doesn't, because let's say you did something great, right? And you were remembered for centuries, right?
Sure.
Well, when the universe comes to an end, does any of that matter?
No.
Of course not, right? And so the only thing that's going to make it matter is if there's an impact that's lasting, even that transcends not just the moments that you live, but also transcends this current mode of existence, right?
Yes.
There's got to be a larger and a bigger impact, which is where God comes in. Although someone like Nietzsche would, he had the phrase Christian nihilism, right? There are people who think that Christians are nihilists because of our views. I'm not sure if you're aware of that Christian nihilism.
Where does that come from?
So Christian nihilism is the idea that Christians do not find any real value or meaning in the world unless there's a God to give things meaning and to give them purpose. And because of that, Christians don't really care about the world. All they're looking forward is to the next world.
Oh yeah.
And since they need a God to give to give their lives and the world meaning, then Nietzsche called them nihilists in that sense, Christian nihilists.
Interesting. Yeah, I've never heard that term. That's fascinating. But we would say that God created this world with purpose, and it's not so much like the future of heaven's a different world. It's a continuation.
It's not like annihilating everything. Like that idea of nothingness. There's
so what
something.
we do now is important for eternity.
But it's also not true, I don't believe, that we find no value in this world, right?
Oh yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not like if you go back to Genesis, we're supposed to cultivate and take care of the world, right? I mean, that's part of the Christian worldview, is that we are to care for the creation that God gave us, right? It's not that we just say, well, it has no meaning and therefore we don't care.
No, absolutely. Well, and there are, like, Nietzsche is right. There are Christians who take that view. And Nietzsche lived at the turn of the 19th century, 18th.
Yeah, 1800s, and he died in 1900.
Okay. Yeah, so see, what's very interesting about that, Shawn, because, I love studying theology, and dispensational theology was really gaining steam at that time. And one of the things it did, and again, I believe in that type of theology, but one of the things that it did was that a lot of people, especially in the Pentecostal circles, and that was coming up at the same time, they took this view of, we just got to get out of this world, we got to remain unscathed, and they even wrote songs about that. I'll fly away, this world's
Yeah.
not my home, I'm just passing through in the sweet by and by, when the roll's called up yonder. And it's all about, we got to get out of here.
Yeah,
Not how do we do what God's given us to do with meaning and purpose here. Right. And so I can understand his idea that, yeah, there are people that live like that are Christians, right?
Yeah.
And it's not a good Christian worldview, because there is purpose with what God has left us to do here.
Right. And I am far from being an expert on Nietzsche. But I've read a little of him, and I've read a little of some other writers, and not everybody thinks that Nietzsche was a nihilist. They actually think that some of what Nietzsche was writing about was, what is life going to be like after nihilism? So once we get through nihilism, right? And Nietzsche's kind of conception of how humanity will evolve once we get through nihilism was his idea of the overman or the superman, or that's who would rise up afterwards, right? Is that type of person. And you know me with G.K. Chesterton, right?
So you love Chesterton.
I do love Chesterton, and I'm going to read this quote here real quick, because Chesterton is writing about Nietzsche in his book Orthodoxy, and he says this. Nietzsche said, beyond good and evil, right, which is the name of Nietzsche's book, because he had not the courage to say more good than good and evil, or more evil than good and evil. Where the idea here is that the nihilism that Nietzsche was struggling with was this idea of morality, right? That we need to get rid, we need to question all the tenets of morality. We need to question the traditions that have come along with morality. We need to upturn the apple cart with Christianity, right?
Yeah.
And so it wasn't, Chesterton's right, it's not more good than good and evil, or more evil than good and evil.
Yeah.
Nietzsche was wanting to get beyond good and evil, which is the title of his book, right? He wants to get past the moral norms of the day, and we need to reinvent those things.
Okay.
Right, and that's the idea there.
But see, the whole idea of that, Shawn, is illogical, because he thinks it's good to get beyond good and evil. No, I know you're not. Right. But this is my question, because Nietzsche, come on, that guy was super smart. I mean, he was brilliant. How did he not see, I'm advocating this would be good for us to do, to get beyond it? It's kind of cutting his legs out from under him by saying we need to get beyond good and evil, because that'd be good. It's like, it doesn't make sense, you know? And I wonder sometimes how people don't see that self-refuting nature of their argument.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could probably be sympathetic to that. I'm sure there's a lot of things that I've said in the past where I've had to have somebody point out, you know, my own blindness to something. So I don't want to hammer him too hard on that. To me, that's kind of low-hanging fruit, maybe.
It's kind of obvious,
But I think in retrospect, right, it's easy to look back. I mean, it's kind of like the positivists at the time. There were some smart people who were positivists, you know, but looking back on it in retrospect, it's like, how could anybody believe that?
Yeah.
But why would you think that?
Well, and that's why we would say it can't be a true worldview, because even the people who wanted to believe it couldn't adhere by it, I guess, right? Like, and that's not to poke holes at them, but just to point out it doesn't work, because it's really hard to live.
Right, and you just see that, right? It's inconsistency either in just your normal day-to-day life of how you're living versus you know, all the things that you're claiming to believe.
Yep.
But that's the whole part of worldview analysis, right? Of kind of testing the worldviews and and seeing which ones stand up to scrutiny.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, would you say that there are people who are like in practical life, people nowadays who consider themselves nihilist or try to live out a nihilistic existence?
I would probably, I don't know if they try to live out a nihilist existence. I mean, they probably claim to be nihilists, but are still, like we were just saying, they still are living some type of inconsistency in their life, even though they maybe they think they like the idea of being a nihilist, right? That it gives them full autonomy, but in reality, I mean, are they still going to work? Are they still?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Are they still paying taxes? Are they still obeying the laws? Or are they still wanting people to treat them fairly?
Yeah.
All kinds of things are probably still very much not
Living
a
it out.
nihilist.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where it's hard to be completely autonomous, because then I want other people to do what I want them to do. So that's not autonomous for them, right? If I'm hoping they'll treat me correctly, which is whatever I view as correctly, right?
Right. I think. Oh, go ahead.
No, that's it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I picked up from Aquinas. I think the only really true autonomous, independent being that exists is God, right? Everything else is contingent because we're finite. And so everything is contingent upon God for its life and its sustenance and just our existence. So.
Yeah, everything. Yeah, no, that's so true. I mean, you think about it from the material sense of like, I can't not eat food.
Yeah.
I just have to have food, and I have to have water as well, and I have to use the bathroom. And there's just things like I can't decide, oh, I'm no longer doing that. I'm beyond that. And I think morals are a similar thing to that. I can't get beyond good and evil, right? Now, I might have a misconception on what's good and evil, but I can't get beyond the notion that there are good and evil. So there's just a lot of, it's a very difficult worldview to live out. And it's very depressing to think nothing I do matters. Everything I do is going to nothingness.
I think you'd almost have to be a sociopath, right? It seems like to kind of live out that type of view. And I think this is why, in the 1900s, the whole absurdist movement, kind of came up, which is really what was an outgrowth of all of this, was just that life is absurd. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's just silliness all around if there's no purpose towards it, and there's no right and wrong, and there's no virtue, and there's it becomes nothing. Well, and that's where the existentialists came in and said, nihilism's true, but we don't like it, so we need to make something of ourselves, basically, right? And they said, even though it's going to nothing, we got to delude ourselves to try to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps and do something important, even though we know it's not important.
Right. Yeah. You have to make your own meaning. You're the author of your own purpose and your own destiny and all of that. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Now, Shawn, what if I want to make my own meaning that there is a God who exists and I'm going to have a life after death? Is that on the table for the existentialists?
No, man, you're just fooling yourself.
Man, I've always wondered about that. What if I wanted to do that? No, that's bad. Okay, never mind.
Why would you do that,
there.
man? The whole point is to be autonomous. Why do you want to put yourself under somebody?
It's because it's better. Yeah, because it's much better. That's so interesting. That's so interesting. So with your dissertation, like what specific take are you going after with nihilism?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so and I'm still kind of fleshing this out, so I don't want to say this is, 100%.
Yeah.
What I'm going, and I can't speak super in depth with this yet. But the angle that I'm taking with it is specifically with Chesterton, right? How did Chesterton handle the atheists and the materialists and the those who were dabbling with nihilism in his day?
Okay.
And I think probably one of the primary approaches that he took with them was he was trying to bring back some semblance of what we would call epistemic humility or intellectual humility, which is one of the virtues of temperance.
Okay.
It falls under temperance. And just the idea that I was mentioning this earlier about the core of like the atheist view or the materialist view. The claim of the atheist is that there is no God, right? God does not exist, right? Well, that is a very certain claim, right? It's not like you're some agnostic who says, well, I don't know if there's a God or not.
Yeah.
Atheism says there is no God. I mean, that's a pretty definitive
It's very
claim.
dogmatic, yeah.
Very dogmatic and very certain,
Yep.
right? The materialists are the same way. There is no immaterial reality, right? All that exists is the physical universe, whatever components make up the physical world, material. And Chesterton would say, well, how do you know that, right? So are you in possession of all the laws of the universe? That you know what they all are? Or how do you know that there is not some law that you have not discovered yet that allows for like miracles or whatever, or can suspend miracles or suspend natural law for miracles or anything like that? He says, how do you know? How can you make that claim? He says, I think the approach is what he was pushing was we need to back up and not make such strong claims as there is no God or there is no immaterial reality, right? That we need to approach our investigation of life and the world and existence with a lot of epistemic humility and saying, here are things that I can be settled on and that I can have convictions of, but at the same time, I need to leave an open mind, not so that I can abandon my convictions and accept anything, but so that I can be open to new evidence and new lines of investigation that may alter what I believe, but I don't jettison all my convictions, right? And so, to me, I kind of see in a lot of his writings that's the approach he's taking, and I think, to me, it looks like a good approach, right? And so I want to kind of investigate that in what I'm writing.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome approach, man, because that truly is open-mindedness, right? If you close the door to the supernatural or you close the door that any God could exist, then when evidence presents itself that doesn't fit in with your dogmatic assumptions, you can't go there. You can't follow them, right? Like, this is something I've thought about recently is, for an atheist or a materialist worldview to be true, they have to believe that all of the billions of people currently alive and in the past who've had supernatural experiences, it wasn't legitimate.
Right.
So what do you explain that phenomenon was? Like how do you, like, that's an audacious claim to say, no, all these billions of people were wrong. And I think that's what you're saying Chesterton was getting at, saying we got to be a little more humble with what we can know, and open-minded to the possibility that maybe there is more than what I think. And I think, I mean, I don't know. The more I learn, and I'm sure the more you learn, the more you realize I don't know anything. I'm not even scratching the surface.
I feel like I'm going to be a lot dumber coming out of a PhD program than I thought I was going into it, right?
Yeah, sure. Well, maybe that's the point, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. And I'll tell you this just as an aside to our discussion here. You know, I've had other people ask me if I'd come on their podcast and talk about Chesterton and nihilism, and I've always been hesitant. So you're the first one that I've said yes to.
Oh, thanks, man.
That's good.
And part of the reason is because I feel absolutely inadequate on the knowledge of a lot of this, because there's so much more I want to read. There's so much more I want to look into, right?
Sure.
But you got to start somewhere. So,
Shawn, I do want to say this. Out of all the people alive in the world today, you are easily in the top 0.5% who knows about Chesterton and nihilism.
That's probably
That's true. It's just
Yeah.
a true statement, right? You are.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah, most people out there don't know what nihilism is. Most don't know who Chesterton was, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Unfortunate. It's
Very
unfortunate
unfortunate.
on the Chesterton part. You can skip the nihilism if you want.
Yeah, right. That's fair.
Pretty depressing.
It
Actually, man,
is.
that's been some of the hardest part with this whole COVID thing and in reading all these nihilistic guys is
Ugh.
it's been so depressing.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
No, it really is to just think there's nothing, no purpose. And then, like you said, for some reason, why go to work? Why get out of bed in the morning? What's the point of any of it? That's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, because I didn't want to have to read all that
Right.
stuff.
That was Camus' question at the beginning of his Myth of Sisyphus book.
Okay.
He opens up his book in the very first paragraph. He says the only live philosophical question is why not suicide?
Yeah.
And and legitimately, I mean, I think that's right. And then he goes on later on in that same first page. He says, the worth of a real philosopher is if they will follow through with their convictions.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, if you're a nihilist and you're not willing to commit suicide, is what I assume he's getting at.
Yeah.
And then maybe you don't really believe it.
Yep. Well, and this is a really sad story, and I'm not going to name names, but I had a professor in seminary, a guy who mentored me. Loved the Lord, but he grew up. His mom and dad were both elite professors at very prestigious universities, but they were nihilists, and they both killed themselves. Because
That's sad.
It's so sad, heartbreaking. But that is the Camus. I agree with you. He's right. That's the end goal of that worldview, and that lie that people have believed that Satan has prospered in the world. It leads people to death. When you believe lies, it always leads to death, right?
Yeah.
But truth sets us free. And
Right.
so, yeah, these ideas, it's interesting to talk about and to think through and to see problems with, but it's devastating that it really does affect people in the real world and in their eternity.
Yeah. What is it? I think Stone Street had a turn on that phrase of ideas have consequences.
Oh.
Then I think John Stone Street added, and bad ideas have victims.
Yep.
Right. And I think that's what this is, right? It causes tragedy and death, and it's just terrible what it leaves in its wake.
It is, and if you contrast it with who God actually made us to be, He gave us a purpose, and He said, "You're made in my image, and you are significant." And even in the creation story, you were intentional, right?
Yeah.
I didn't make you before the food and be like, "Oh, that's an afterthought. I better figure it out for these guys." Like, everything was made for you, with you in mind, because you're the pinnacle of my creation. And Satan's tricked people into thinking you're nothing, you have no purpose, your individuality and your personality do not matter at all. And you've got to get to this point where you realize nothingness is coming. And whether it's through Buddhism or whether it's through nihilism, however I can accomplish that in you, I want to. Because it's really stripping away the dignity and worth that God created us with. That's what He's all about, right? Destroying God's greatest work of art. Which is us.
Yeah. No, that's I absolutely agree. Chesterton, he ends. No, he doesn't end it. I'm thinking of a different writing, but he says that the two greatest sins against hope is presumption and despair. Right. The presumption that we know, and the despair against, that things are just meaningless and pointless. Right. And
man, that's good.
Yeah,
that guy was pretty wise, I think.
I was pretty smart. Yeah. He knew a thing or two.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I love Chesterton. It's so fascinating to me. Listen, C.S. Lewis was great.
Sure,
but people read Lewis. He learned everything from Chesterton.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
That's right.
And people read Lewis all the time, and a lot of people don't read Chesterton. I'm like, you come on, like. So if you're out there and you're watching the show right now, click on. You know what? I'm going to put a link in the video and in the show notes. you're going to get a link to G.K. Chesterton's book, Orthodoxy, and it's a must read. Introduction, here you go. So click on that, buy it right now. You can thank us later. It will blow your mind.
Yeah, Robbie actually introduced me to that book. I read it for the first time through with him, and yeah, it's phenomenal. He's just such a brilliant mind.
Brilliant. Brilliant thinker.
And a lot of the things we're talking about right now, he deals with throughout that whole book. I mean, that's, Yep,
it's awesome. So, well, Shawn, if people want to follow you or see the stuff that you're doing, how can they do that?
Oh, man. That's a good question. I don't know.
You have an Instagram account, right? You're on Facebook. You post stuff on Facebook a lot.
Yeah, I am on Facebook. I don't know if I have an Instagram account.
You do have one because we tagged you, but you're not very active on there. So Facebook's
is it
better.
Is it Smart Faith? It's probably not a personal one, right?
No, it's a personal one, yeah.
Oh, well, I'll have to go check it out.
I think your last post was like from February of 2019 or something.
Maybe that's it.
Dude, I can't remember what I did last week, so...
That's all right.
That's good.
And hey, and you've contributed to some books, right?
Yeah, and every once in a while I'm on Twitter, but Facebook, you can always find me. And if you look for me on Facebook, I look like Chesterton because I'm using a picture. So, last December, a book came out on philosophy in Disney, and I had a chapter in there that I co-wrote with my professor on it was actually on Chesterton and Mary Poppins. And then I just turned in a chapter a couple of weeks ago for another book on Disney and theology that should be out next year.
Oh, nice. That's awesome.
Yeah. And then and that one's looking at the virtue of humility versus pride on that one. And then, but yeah, I had a couple of chapters in Shawn and Josh McDowell's book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. I did a chapter on is Christian pagan religion, or does that pagan roots or something like that? And then I did the one on resurrection.
And that's the updated one. Like, is it new evidence, right, that demands a verdict? Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll put links in the show notes and on the video for that. So people, if you are out there and you want to go buy it, see the stuff Shawn's done, it is awesome.
Yeah.
And if you want to dive into G.K. Chesterton and nihilism, you're going to have to wait till he finishes his dissertation. And then you can go hog wild on that. That's going to be great. Well, Shawn, man, thanks so much for being with us today. This has been awesome and really enlightening. I'm really thankful that you've delved into the philosophy on this and even seeing the progression of it. And it's helpful to know how these ideas are developed, the thoughts behind them, and obviously what issues there are with them and how they don't correlate with reality. So thanks so much, man, for being on. It's been awesome.
Hey, thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
Yep.
Go have some coffee on me.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. Well, hey, thank you, listeners out there, for watching. If you would, subscribe to our videos, follow us, rate us, review us, all that normal stuff. But hey, we're really thankful for you being here with us today on Christ Culture and Coffee, and we'll be back next week to talk more about nihilism. We'll see you then.
Yeah, see you.